We keep the air on. Okay, I'll turn the air off if you turn the music on. If it gets too hot in here, I'll just tell me, right? Get loud. Easy.
What's behind the name Academy West?
Okay, hang on just a second, guys.
You got it.
Can we go ahead and start and then maybe you can put that in there?
I'll literally answer every single question at the end.
All right, well, thank you folks for coming to Halen House's Healing Focus for July. We are honored to have Andy with Academy West, who is going to tell us about how we breathe matters. It absolutely does. And how to understand the impact of functional and dysfunctional breathing and simple tools to change your life. I believe you probably have a lot to teach me, so I'm very interested in this talk personally. So Andy, would you like to just introduce yourself and tell us about Academy West and take it away?
Certainly. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you all for coming here, and thanks to anybody who's watching this right now. So my name is Andy Spatier. I am a doctor of physical therapy, which means I'm a functional movement expert, and my whole life has been about movement, whether that's been as an athlete or as a kid who's trying to escape a house that's sort of difficult to understand what's going on and why one parent's doing one thing and one parent's doing another. And then that followed me all the way into college, being able to play a college sport as a very little person playing bigger sports. And then even more fun, I got to go and be a pro athlete. It was super exciting. And along that path, I got really obsessed with how people move and how I move. And I never thought about breathing ever. Even in PT school, we don't learn about breathing. For years, I was the primary PT for the ICU at St. Charles Hospital. So I worked with everybody on the worst day of their life. And unlike anything that happens to you in the ICU, I'm the only thing that you have to do for yourself, right? I'm not a pill, I'm not a procedure, I'm not a piece of equipment, I'm not a surgery. I am the person who's helping to get you to get yourself out of bed, because no matter why you're there, the bed is going to kill you. So along that road, I got really good at my job. I had a lot of professional credibility built up, and people trusted me. So I just started helping people to take deep breaths using one of these things, these incentive spirometers. These are everywhere. And I just essentially helped them do that, a couple of deep breaths at the end of every session. And everybody told me how great a job I was doing. So I had to go and learn about this thing because I didn't want to be totally full of nonsense. And as soon as I went and learned about breathing, within 10 minutes, I realized that despite that impressive background, I've been breathing dysfunctionally my whole life. Not only that, but I had been encouraging all my patients to breathe dysfunctionally as well. And nobody around me was correcting this because nobody around me had any idea what it was. Nobody knew the difference between functional and dysfunctional breathing, which is what you're going to learn today. So let's get this to work. Okay. Trauma. How does this relate to trauma? Well, trauma is one of those words right now that's kind of a buzzword. It's sort of in vogue. You know, we're all sort of talking about it and dealing with it, and we've all collectively gone through what COVID did to our society, and it's rather traumatic. But trauma is individual. Mine is different from everybody else's, and the way that trauma works with breathing is that, biologically speaking, human beings breathe how we feel and feel how we breathe. So it makes a lot of sense to understand, what are we doing with our breathing? Is this working for me, or is this working against me? That's what we said. How often have we been told to just breathe? How often have we told someone else to just breathe, or even told this to ourselves? That's what I was doing. I was basically helping people and saying, just breathe, with a lot of enthusiasm. That leaves the window open for harm, because functional breathing and dysfunctional breathing are vastly different things. So we're going to differentiate these two. Because if I'm helping people to functionally breathe, I can change their life. You're going to understand the 10 words that encompass functional breathing today. But if I'm dysfunctionally breathing, it doesn't really matter what I'm doing, because this is harming me physically, chemically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, 20,000 times a day. So I am obsessed with your breathing, specifically yours, and the fact that it's yours. I really love the idea of breathing in general, because it's an action, it's a verb, it's movement, it's not breath, right? It's not something that we can be out of. You're never out of breathing. You're breathing or you're not. So the fact that it's yours means you can consciously control it. I'm actually pretty much obsessed with your breathing. I want you to feel, see, use, and talk about your breathing differently. That's our objectives today. As you can tell, I am completely obsessed with your breathing. It's all I think about. It's all I do. It's my favorite thing to do and talk about. So I'm going to try to infect you with some of that, where it's gone from this thing I never really thought about to the first thing that I use. Because your conscious breathing, meaning the breathing you do on purpose, trains your subconscious breathing. As few as 25 or 30 breaths a day can influence the other 20,000 that you take. And over time, that effect is additive. And you can actually transform your subconscious breathing from dysfunctional to functional. So this is the brain that we're talking about here. So here's our brain stem. We see three little structures. The pink structure, that represents your amygdala. That's going to be your center for fear, very powerful emotions. They're going to kind of pass through your amygdala, and that's going to help to sort of mitigate your emotional responses. There's another thing there called locus ceruleus. That's our blue spot. It literally means blue place because if you slice the brain open, there's a little blue spot because it produces a blue chemical. That blue chemical is called adrenaline or norepinephrine, kind of the sentinel neurotransmitter of fight or flight, vigilance. And then between those, you'll see a little green hexagon. That represents something called your pre-Botzinger complex. Very cool name. It's got a little umlaut on it and everything. What it is it's your breathing pacemaker. It's the part of your brain that will allow you to automatically breathe at whatever rate you need to based on the chemistry and the pressure sensors throughout your body. There's all kinds of signals throughout your body that connect to this part of the brain. So this is your nervous system as it pertains to breathing. We've got nerves that come off and go to the shoulders. We've got nerves that go down to the heart and the lungs. But we also have nerves that a single nerve here called the vagus nerve, which goes all the way down to your groin and innervates basically everything in the middle. You can think of it like the superhighway for rest and digest. All of these nerves are interesting, but really what we're going to be talking about today are muscles. Breathing is movement. It's movement of more than 100 muscles and structures that act in careful coordination to move you through your life. So we're going to differentiate these two, but notice where these are controlled in the brain. This is the cortical part of the brain. This is the part that we can use on purpose. When your fingers or your face or your knee or your hip moves, it moves because of a little signal right here. All these structures are controlled by your conscious brain. So this is what I affectionately call the human breathing system. Stretching from your nose to the base of your skull, to the tips of your shoulder, it wraps around your thorax, all the way around your abdomen, all the way to the bottom of your groin. That's what we use to breathe. Lungs get all the credit for it. You Google breathing, you're going to get lots of pictures of lungs. But lungs are like the recipient of breathing. They only move because something else moved them. They're just passive. So really, these are what we're concerned with. That's why you're talking to a physical therapist, because we love muscles and structures and nerves. So in order to understand this, we want to differentiate these three areas. The abdomen is one group of muscles. The chest wall is a very different group of muscles. And the accessories, the neck and shoulders, are a third group of muscles. They all act differently, and we have to understand how they work together in order to master the system. So I love metaphors. So one of the metaphors I'll use is kids in a classroom. Each of these groups of muscles is a little bit like a different kid in the classroom, and there's only 3 kids. The front row is this rowdy kid, the accessory muscles kind of disruptive. The middle row is a very eager and enthusiastic kid, the chest wall. And then the back row, this is a very smart but very shy kid who knows all the answers but just isn't very assertive. Another way to talk about it is pieces of a vehicle that you drive through your life. So the abdomen is the engine powering everything. The chest wall is like the chassis and the frame. And the neck and shoulders, the accessories, are the emergency response system. So functional versus dysfunctional. Functional breathing helps and boosts every single system in your body at the same time, thousands of times every day. It's like a biomechanical maximizing of efficiency of your breathing. It comes down to 10 words. That's the best part. All this information I'm going to give you today, which is like a fire hose, comes down to 10 words, and that's what I want you to take away. Here they are. In the nose, diaphragm first, chest second, shoulders stay still. It also makes an excellent dance move. In the nose, diaphragm first, chest second, shoulders stay still. You can kind of think of it like a dance move because you're kind of dancing this one move through your whole life. It doesn't really matter what you're doing, having a baby, having a panic attack, living your life, dying a peaceful death, right? Getting to sleep, waking up in the morning. It comes down to these 10 words. So this is what it looks like. Now this is sped up 2.5 times speed, but I want you to notice first that the abdomen's moving most, it's moving first. It expands forward, but it also expands to the side. There's a gradual wave-like progression that moves up the chest wall and stops right about at the shoulders. The neck stays relatively quiet, the shoulders stay quiet, the spine stays quiet. Breathing is about doing more with less. So you have that extra energy to do other things. In addition, the slower we breathe, the more it tells our brain that we are okay. Now, dysfunctional breathing, on the other hand, harms and hinders every single system in your body. And it's what we do on autopilot. This is what's a little bit scary. There's some diabolical things about breathing, and this is one of them. We are evolving into a less functionally breathing species. Our brains are getting bigger, jaws are getting smaller, our diets are getting softer, our devices are pulling us forward, so we're kind of evolving into this thing that breathes more with our mouth than with our nose. In addition, we have mirror neurons that make us behaviorally repeat what other people do. So if I see one person breathing like this, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to think that I need to. And worst yet, we live in a society where the patriarchy has told us to suck in our gut, focus on core strength, get all this tight. All that's ruining our breathing. So this is what it looks like. This is the most common breathing pattern that I've evaluated in physicians, teachers, athletes, all people that are really good at trying. The abdomen moves less. Instead, the chest moves first and most. You can see it's a little bit more vertical, and it's kind of leaking into the shoulders and neck. The problem is, somebody tries harder and harder, and the harder they try, the more it goes into the shoulders and neck, and this is where breathing becomes catastrophic for your whole body. So it's why it's linked with all these things. Now, some of these are trauma specific. Some of them may just be tangential to what somebody's going through. Yeah, I'm dealing with my PTSD, and at the same time, I've got acid reflux every day, or I can't sleep, or I've got pelvic floor pain, or I'm getting panic attacks. All kinds of things are related to it. So, bottom line, how we breathe matters. It matters enough to talk about it with more than 2 words, just breathe. So, in the nose, I could do this whole presentation on the nose because I think it's that cool, but I'm limiting myself to 1 slide. Your nose matters because it's the supercharger for your breathing system. It's actually about the size of your fist in your head, both this way and this way. It's there to optimize all the air you breathe through this warm, spongy, soft tissue called your nasal concha or your turbinates. Now, what's this going to do? It's going to filter the air that we breathe and pressurize it so that it comes into our lungs, not at such a fast rate, which means we can expand our lungs more gradually. It also humidifies and warms the air that we breathe. So one study looked at the difference between breathing in your nose and out your nose versus in your nose and out your mouth. So 42% change in hydration levels. There's so much water vapor in the air that we breathe that closing our mouth and letting our nose do the work really helps. It also helps to regulate our brain. We've got a right nostril that correlates with our left brain and a left nostril that correlates with our right brain. So we experience something every 2 or 3 hours where there's a shift in blood flow from one side of this spongy tissue to the other. Our nasal cycle flows back and forth so that one side of the brain gets a break and one side of the brain takes the load. There's been a disruption noted in nasal cycles. People with depression, people with anxiety, people with insomnia, people with schizophrenia have less regularity of their nasal cycles. So one side of their brain is working too hard. We've also got this little guy right here. This is nitric oxide. Chemical optimization happens in the nose because our nose produces tons of this. Nitric oxide is a very common chemical. It's in every single cell of your body. It's there for cell maintenance. So nitric oxide does 3 powerful things for our breathing. When we breathe in our nose, we bathe our lungs in this substance, and that's our first line of immune defense. It neutralizes fungus, it neutralizes bacteria and viruses, including coronavirus. There's lots of research that shows this going back. It just hasn't really been studied with COVID because we haven't had time. So it also is a powerful vasodilator. Breathe in your nose, your blood vessels are more open, which means your blood pressure goes down, which means your heart rate goes down and your circulation gets boosted. That's helpful for recovery. It's also helpful for athletic performance. Anybody that's dealing with high blood pressure, it's all about getting their nose to work. And the last thing that nitric oxide does is it's basically like an oxygenation booster. So hemoglobin carries oxygen all over our body. When we add nitric oxide in, it makes it easier for hemoglobin to distribute that oxygen into the various tissues of our body. When you breathe with your mouth, You breathe in a bigger, faster hole. You don't get any of the properties of the nose. In fact, you throw the whole system off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin that thought and keep talking about these 10 words. Diaphragm first. Oh my God, I'm so obsessed with the diaphragm. Okay, so this is your diaphragm. It sits right here in your rib cage, but it's a part of your abdomen. In fact, it's hard to locate. It's hard to spell. It's hard to pronounce. And it's really hard to understand why we have been trying to not say this and saying things like belly breathing and breathing with your stomach and all this stuff. Just to be really clear, this is where your belly is. This is where your diaphragm is. It's way up here. We're going to spend a lot of time finding it here in a couple of minutes, but it's important to know where it is so we can use it, because this is the single most impactful muscle in your body. So this is our primary inhale muscle. When we inhale, this dome-like sheet of muscle contracts and pulls downward. Again, how we talk about breathing matters. We don't push our stomach out, we pull down with our diaphragm. People do very different things when they're told to push their stomach out. So this is how it moves. The diaphragm pulls downward when we inhale and gradually moves back upward when we exhale. But as you can see, it not only moves up and down, but it moves side to side, front to back. This thing's moving 360 degrees all the time. And that's why it's the primary piston pumping this engine. Pumps and pumps and pumps without us even needing to think about it. It's a little bit like the shy kid in class. Very smart, but not very assertive. Every single muscle in your body that's attached to your skeleton, there's more than 600 of them, are dominated by fast twitch muscle fibers built for speed and power, not your diaphragm. It has more slow twitch muscle fibers than any muscle in your body. So it wants to do this amazing up and down, side to side, front to back expansion thing thousands of times every day. It just doesn't want to move that fast. So the faster we breathe, the more we leave this behind. And if we know how to target it and actually move it, we can get some of those slow twitch fibers to convert to fast twitch. So this kid becomes more assertive the more you call him. It's attached to your heart. We often think about lungs when we're thinking about breathing, but your heart gets pumped just like your lungs do. And the bigger pumps we get, the more it regulates your nervous system. So this sac that surrounds your heart, the pericardium, runs consistently with the central tendon of your diaphragm. You can think of this like the center of the trampoline. When we want to bounce as high as possible, we bounce in the middle. Your heart wants to move as much as possible when you breathe to regulate your nervous system. That's why we care about heart rate variability. Bigger breaths, bigger change in the size of your heart, which means the rate changes. Every time it goes up, that's your sympathetic drive. Every time it goes down, that's your parasympathetic drive. So a couple structures to point out here. Notice where this green pin is. The green pin represents these long strands coming down from your diaphragm. Those are called the pleura of your diaphragm. Pleura is Latin for legs. So the legs of your diaphragm come down and attach to L1, L2, L3, L4. That's why there are decades worth of studies that link diaphragm weakness and dysfunctional breathing with low back pain, with balance problems, posture problems, even with chronic ankle sprains. Can't believe this is related to my diaphragm, but this is basically the center of my gravity right here. So when this thing is strong and assertive, everything is better. When it's weak, things fall apart. Another thing to look at right here. This is your esophagus, your food pipe. So it comes down through your body and goes into your diaphragm and onto your stomach. There's this little loop of muscle that's surrounding the esophagus that's responsible for maintaining gastric contents. One of the leading things that points me in the direction of dysfunctional breathing is when somebody has acid reflux. Because thousands of times a day, half the time, every time they inhale, this thing is wide open. And as they change their breathing pattern and strengthen the diaphragm, reflux starts to go away. So your transverse abdominis, this is your primary exhale muscle. It's like the partner of your diaphragm. This is going to be the deepest layer of the abdominal wall. It's the only one that inserts inside of the rib cage. So all the flexing and twisting and sit-ups and stuff that we do has nothing to do with this layer. This layer instead wraps all the way around your abdomen with these horizontal fibers. It's what spreads apart when somebody's pregnant and that they want to knit back together after they have a baby. So it inserts right here on your lumbar spine as well. And every time you exhale, it gently squeezes inward like a corset without you even thinking about it. These two are partners in crime, and we can tell from the inside out view. This is the inside of your chest wall with the back of the chest wall right here. This arcing line shows the diaphragm with its vertical fibers intersecting with the horizontal fibers of the transverse abdominis. Technically speaking, we call this interdigitation, like fingers braiding together. And it so clearly shows that when we're breathing functionally with the abdomen first and most, creating stability in the spine. So now we're starting to see, okay, this really does matter for my movement. So put it together with the pelvic floor, this completes this abdominal ball of muscle. These 3 layers of muscle sit in the pelvis, and they're like the lower gatekeeper for pressure control. They pump like a piston every time we breathe. Now, this might seem a little bit off, but every time the diaphragm pulls downward, the pelvic floor reflects it. It actually moves down and away when we inhale and back up when we exhale. So it moves every time we breathe like a piston, but it also moves every time we move. So it's a little bit like the struts in your car. Struts in your car are there to make sure that you have a smooth ride, so they can't be too loose or too tight. Same thing with your pelvic floor. We don't want it really tight all day long. And we certainly don't want it to be loosey-goosey all day long. It has to move when we move. Put this all together, we've got this amazing ball of muscle that's working to pump in every single direction to create the pressures for breathing. It's all a big pressure system. And when this is happening, we're providing cable-like support, just like this bridge. So dysfunctional breathing basically means clipping some of these cables or loosening them and adding a bunch of cars to the road. So we've got this big ball of muscle in the abdomen that works like a slow-moving unit. We know that because of the slowness of those muscle fibers. This is built for efficiency and endurance. Now, make no mistake about it, this is our core strength. This is where I get to kind of poke fun at PT a little bit because I'm a part of the problem. So my wife's also a PT. She and I met in PT school, and we had like a 2-year fight about core strength, which is like the most PT fight to have. Because these are the cues that I've gotten, right, throughout my whole life. College athlete, pro athlete, physical therapist. This is what I've heard. Set, hold, tighten, brace, draw your belly button towards your spine. Hold it really tightly. That's bonkers. That doesn't work. That's like me going to the gym and picking up weights to get my biceps strong. I'm just picking up and going, am I doing it? Is this working? Hopefully some kind person would come up and say, hey, will you move your whole arm through that range of motion? Because that's how you're going to get stronger. We can't just expect to get strong holding this tightly because we don't have range of motion. In addition, I can't do that and breathe. I'm going to have to breathe somewhere else. So that's where we get to chest second. Chest is so important to breathing. This is where our words matter, right? If I'm told diaphragmatic breathing, that's great. Maybe I'm going to move my diaphragm, but I need this also. The worst yet is belly breathing. I had one patient who was told, it's really important that you belly breathe. Nobody's trying to harm him with that. Maybe they're avoiding saying diaphragm because it's a weird word. Remember when they named a prophylactic device after the diaphragm? And then they recalled it. That was the whole thing. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why we don't want to say it. So either way, he's told to belly breathe, so he does. In between his 2 strokes, he locks his chest in place and breathes with his abdomen for a few years. And now he's shaped like this, and he can't swallow. And he can't produce sound. Because both of these things matter. That person wasn't trying to harm him by saying belly breathing, but because of the language that we use, because it's incomplete and leading to more misunderstanding, it's actually inflicting harm. So chest second. The chest is the eager kid in class. It loves to answer questions. So every time the teacher asks a question, like, oh, call me. Teacher calls on, they're like, I forgot. And then as soon as that question comes up again, hands in the air. So every time they want to raise their hand, but their answers aren't very substantive. It's a little bit like the chassis and the frame of the vehicle. Chassis and frame are there to defend the driver and transfer energy to the road. That's what our rib cage does. Defends our heart and lungs and transfers energy to the spine, to the arms, and to the legs so we can move. It does this through intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles are located between and behind all the ribs. They help to open and close that space, both on inhale and exhale, but these are fast twitch muscle fibers, built for speed, built for power. So we basically have this little bellows system. Bottom hand is the abdomen, and the top hand is the chest. When the bottom hand pulls down and the top hand pulls up and out, we create an inhale. This is where all of our energy is spent in breathing, even though it's a tiny little bit of our life. This whole time I'm talking to you, I'm exhaling, and then I get a quick little breath in and keep talking. So all of our energy is spent here. This is where dysfunction happens. Exhaling is basically passive. I don't really have to use a lot of energy to do it. I just kind of let those structures recoil. So I set myself up for function by how I inhale. But this is a little bit of a mismatch because the bottom hand is slower. Remember those slow twitch fibers? 2/3 of our quiet breathing happens without the chest wall moving at all. Only when we need a bigger, more powerful breath do we then recruit the chest wall. Bottom hand first, Top hand second. This is functional breathing. It means at the same time, I'm pumping venous blood back to my heart, arterial blood to every organ, to the tips of my toes. I'm pumping my digestion. I'm pumping my lymphatic fluid. I'm posturally standing myself upright. I'm actually sending helpful signals to the brain. This is what it looks like. Super efficient. This can be done running for 254 straight miles, which one of our athletes did. 86 hours of running, breathing like this. And if we breathe how we feel and feel how we breathe, he told me that when he got to the finish line, he felt like he was dancing, not like he was being crushed, right? The pain cave, no way, not when you're breathing like this. Now we can see why it's easy to overpower it though. That top hand is faster, really easy to recruit it. And if I'm trying harder and I'm trying harder, what happens? You get a cramp. Your body starts talking to you saying, I can pump all day right here. That bottom hand's going, more. And we get pain right at ribs 8, 9, and 10 on both sides. That literally makes us stop. There's no like powering through a cramp. You must stop because your breathing system is wired directly into your nervous system and you literally are threatening your survival when you can't breathe well. So our breathing's in charge. The harder I try, the more I breathe dysfunctionally, the more it goes into my neck and shoulders. And this is catastrophic. Shoulders, stay still because you're wrecking my breathing. Why? Because that's how we're built. Now, the shoulders are the rowdy kid. Okay, this kid's in the front row because we need to keep an eye on this kid. I can see your shoulders without taking your clothes off. It's really easy, right? So this kid raises their hand. They're like, can I go to the nurse? Can I go to the bathroom? And otherwise, they're falling asleep or they're like waking up and not paying attention. They're super disruptive, taking lots of classroom resources. It's the emergency response system because these muscles actually help me survive. They're wired in a way that's actually important. So survival is different than thriving. Ask anybody who's been through a traumatic situation, right? We're not just trying to survive, we're trying to thrive. So these ensure my survival a few different ways. So we're talking about the upper trapezius, that's going to be my shoulder shrugging muscle, and then sternocleidomastoid, that's going to be my blind spot checker head turner. Put those together, they're going to raise my shoulders, turn my head. That helps me survive first by stabilizing my eyeballs. That's really important for survival. Second, it helps me to socially engage. If I talk to you and I don't move my neck and shoulders at all, I look crazy and you're not going to trust me. But if I'm like doing this, we've got emotions, you're like, okay, he's a human being, I can trust that guy. But the most important way that they actually ensure that we survive is that if something scares me, my shoulders come up, my head turns. That could be a saber-toothed tiger behind me. Who knows? Big loud sound, everybody in here is going to jump. So these are really wasteful. They're wasteful of precious energy because each of my arms weighs about 9% of my body weight, no matter who I am. So every time I do this, I'm lifting 18% of my body weight. And I'm expanding my chest less than 1%. So I'm dumping resources into something and I'm getting nothing in return. I'm burning my energy faster than I can produce it. In addition, they are painful. Pain and trauma go hand in hand, whether it's pain from an actual injury or pain that I'm experiencing because of the emotional charge that follows me. Pain goes with these muscles. If I use these muscles to breathe, first of all, I'm going to overuse these muscles, even slightly. That means neck pain, shoulder pain, headache pain. In addition, I'm not expanding the chest outward like I would if I were breathing functionally. Instead, I'm pulling it upward so we get thoracic pain in the spine and in the chest. And worse yet, if I'm doing all this with my chest and my neck and my shoulders, it means that I'm either holding my abdomen really tightly, like some PT probably told me to do, or I'm letting it be super loose. Either way, back pain, hip pain, pelvic floor pain, all kinds of things start to happen when we're doing this. Now, this is what's so scary. These are the fastest muscles in your breathing system. They're built for survival. We know that because only these two muscles, they're the only muscles that are below your face that don't connect to your spinal cord. Instead, they go right to your brainstem, right to the place that we were talking about before. So every time I'm stressed or I'm afraid or I'm in pain, my shoulders are going to move. That's how I'm built. But what we don't realize is that this little nerve that goes from brain to muscle also sends signals from muscle to brain. So even just a slight movement of these muscles over and over again is like micro signaling my brain with stress and fear and pain and anxiety every time I do it. So somebody can actually just breathe and make things much worse. This is what we mean. We're going right there. All of these muscles, these nerves, connect to that area. So when we breathe with the mouth, we're breathing faster. It's a big open hole. I can breathe quickly, but it means my chest and my neck and shoulders are going to jump in right away. So I'm breathing faster, but I'm also getting drier and dirtier air. So I'm increasing the inflammatory response in the body. Our airways are super duper sensitive. Anybody who's been outside on a cold day that's taken a big breath in their mouth knows what that feels like. Your body starts inflammation processes as soon as that air hits it. Doesn't take much. It also means that we get postural dysfunction. This is reinforcing what we're talking about. The more we mouth breathe, the more the head grows forward, the jaw grows down, back, and narrow. So we get bunching teeth, sunken eyes, bigger nose. All of this stuff happens into our 70s. We also get the same dysfunction going all the way down the spine. Somebody's posture is 100% dependent on how they breathe 20,000 times a day and night. It also means that we're underserving all these systems. We already mentioned the whole ankle sprains thing, but balance is a big thing going forward. Bone density loss actually happens when we mouth breathe. Because the faster you breathe, the more you're dumping off carbon dioxide, this thing that we're trying to exhale. So the faster you breathe, the more you blow it off. Your body needs to write that chemical reaction so it draws bicarbonate ions from your long bones. So osteoporosis and overbreathing absolutely are connected. The same thing happens in the teeth. We get more infections and more cavities because our teeth are now softer. We fail to move the kidneys. We fail to move guts. One of my favorite calls in the hospital used to be, hey, can you come up from ICU to like the 5th floor for Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so? They're going to discharge. They just had surgery and they just need to poop before they go home. And I'd go up there and I'd see them and I'd watch their breathing. And of course, it's just like this. And about halfway through our 15-minute chat about functional breathing, they're like, I got to go poop. And occasionally they're like, I just pooped. And it didn't really matter that you were just sitting there. So we also failed to pump the heart and the lungs. First time we're going to actually talk about lungs. Finally, we get to lungs. Most of your lungs are in the bottom. Very tiny bit is at the top. But you also have nervous receptors in your lungs. The upper fields have receptors for our fight and flight response. So a single breath taken like this, up into these lobes first, sends that signal of fight or flight to the brain. And the opposite's also true. Somebody having a panic attack can simply breathe functionally, expand the bottom of their lungs first, and they'll start to feel better one breath at a time, because literally the most important breath is the one you're taking next. So it raises our arterial blood pressure, it lowers our venous blood pressure, it opens us up for infections, and mouth breathing keeps us in a state of fight or flight, whether we're trying to overcome a panic attack, go to sleep, run a marathon, doesn't matter, it's all the same. So I really want to talk about dysfunctional breathing, because I didn't know it existed. Dysfunctional breathing, turns out, is applying chronic physical, chemical, mental, emotional, spiritual stress to our body thousands of times every day, which means we're increasing inflammation. Anybody who's in a trauma field knows that inflammation doesn't have to just come from something physical or chemical. It can come from something emotional. It's our body's defensive response, and when we're in that response, our immunity, our healing, our recovery is worse, because we're just trying to survive that tiger that's chasing me all the time. What if I'm creating that tiger in my brain with my breathing? It means I'm getting weaker. I get weaker in the muscles that I'm overusing in my neck, chest, and shoulders and develop all kinds of postural patterns. But I also get weaker in the muscles that I'm underutilizing, like that shy kid in the back of the class, my diaphragm. But we feel it in poor performance. I can't sleep. I can't have sex. My balance is terrible. My endurance is terrible. My gut's a mess. I'm worried all the time. I'm having panic attacks. Those are all experiences, but what we really feel is this: shame, guilt, and fear. Shame that I'm not who I used to be or who I could be. Guilt that, I don't know, maybe I have something to do with it, but I don't know what to do. And fear that it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And that leads to anger. Anger that I don't know why I feel the way I feel, but something's continuing. And we know that the research links these emotions with chronic pain. And honestly, if this was the cycle, my job would be fairly easy, but it's more like this. Everything's ping-ponging off of itself, and one thing goes wrong and the other thing goes wrong. And what do we say to people? We say, just breathe. And I said, just breathe. Because for months, here's how I was teaching fresh heart surgery patients and telling people how to take deep breaths. Just breathe. Totally dysfunctional, actually causing them harm. And nobody could say anything. So I had this complete sea change. I came back from this course, which turned into mentorship and turned into a whole clinical road. But when I came back, I was really shaken, because here I am, like, I came into this thinking I'm like a rock star PT and I'm helping everybody. Turns out I'm actually harming them. And then this person is on my caseload. It's like she's there to help me fix this. She's 36. This is Patricia. She has terminal breast cancer. She's going home on hospice tomorrow. That's usually not a PT diagnosis. That's like a get out of here diagnosis. So she's huffing and puffing. She's on 5 liters of oxygen and she's just crouched in her bed. And I swallowed all the imposter syndrome that I had in me and went in there and got her to talk about her breathing, feel it, see it, use it a little bit differently, like we're doing here today. And when I came back next day, she said, Andy, what we did yesterday made me feel better than anything has in the last 5 years. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I started Academy West that day. For a long time, she was my only patient. I would just see her in her home every few weeks. And every few weeks, I'd watch her start to get a little bit better. Her cancer did not get better. 7 months later, it took her life. But in that time, her oxygen needs went down. Her functionality went up. She could get out of bed on her own. She could climb the stairs. She could go outside and watch her son ride his bike. She got to do the things that really meant her quality of life was better. And it was her breathing that she mastered. And I met so many more people, whether it was an athlete or a musician or an everyday person trying to get a little better, or somebody dealing with panic attacks with Vietnam, or somebody who had a tear in their pelvic floor on their 3rd child and has had fecal incontinence for 40 years. All of these people with wildly different things all got the same basic thing. In the nose, diaphragm first, chest second, shoulders stay still, chip away at this small thing and turn suffering into a superpower. Because functional breathing does that. Functional breathing is driven by you. It's in you. It costs nothing. It has no negative side effects. It's not a procedure. It's not a piece of equipment. It's not a surgery. It's literally the most empowering thing because you already have it. It's just a matter of using that equipment a little bit differently and reducing stress with every single breath you take, which tamps down that inflammatory response. Turns out your natural anti-inflammatory is carbon dioxide, the thing you're breathing out all the time. So it boosts our immunity, healing, and recovery and gets us stronger with every breath we take. Turns out core strength is less about your sit-ups and more about how you're breathing when you do the dishes. But when we improve performance and begin to gain a little bit back, oh my God, I can do that thing that I'm not used to doing. I can sleep, I can eat, I can have sex. Holy moly, that's when we get these emotions. Love, joy, and purpose. I love what I'm doing. I have joy again in my life and I know my purpose. That's when we're affecting quality of life. So really, it's just one more analogy. It's a traffic light. We all know these things are here for our safety and efficiency. Green lights, all day. Give me a life full of green lights. I would love that. That's our abdomen. We use this first and most for every single breath. It literally doesn't matter what's going on. That's how we're built. After green lights come yellow lights. And yellow lights are fine. I'm an East Coast driver at heart. I go through a lot of yellow lights. But I always want to make sure I know what I'm doing. I don't want to hit anybody. I don't want to cause an accident. But if I'm going through red lights, my good buddy Cheryl's going to advise me not to do that. She's going to be like, that's dangerous. You're going to increase your stress levels. You're probably going to hit somebody. You're probably going to cause an accident, maybe get a ticket. There's such an outsized health cost, physical, chemical, mental, emotional, spiritual, to breathing dysfunctional. So we're going to spend a little more time feeling, seeing, and using this. For those that are tuning in, there's lots of different ways to do that. The people that are here are going to get sort of a primo shot. But really, it is about your breathing because it's yours. I cannot do it for you. And you can. I have literally never met somebody who can't get this. So this is what we do. We teach you to feel, see, use, and talk about your breathing differently. And you gradually nudge the system back towards function. Because the thing that nudged it really hard in the other direction, the trauma that you endured, it's not impossible to overcome. This organization shows that. This is just the most helpful tool that is literally never without. So what we're trying to do is provide a bridge at Academy West from dysfunctional breathing to functional breathing. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can do that. One of the ways we do that is individual care. People come in one-on-one, we evaluate your breathing mechanics and get you to understand what's going on. Another way is through our classes. We have group classes, some of them are fitness-oriented, some of them are oriented towards different things, but bottom line, you're going to walk away understanding more about how to actually experience your functional breathing. We also run a support group. Support group is once a month. It is free, and it literally means whatever support looks like. It is secular. Every support group has education, sharing, discussion, and movement. And best of all, we just finished this. We finished an online course. So somebody can take the information that they saw here and consume it at their own rate. It also has the tools that we're going to go over here in a second for how to actually nudge the system toward more functional breathing, and they can start to fix it on their own for less than a copay. So with that, I want to briefly open it up to questions. And if you don't have like a burning question, we're going to go into a practical portion. Cool? Anybody have a burning question? Yes.
I snore.
I'm going to table your snoring question.
Your moon chat.
There's a lot of ways to do it. I'm going to table snoring question to the end. It's a really good question. Snoring always has a health cost, right? Dysfunctional breathing of any kind taxes your body, and snoring is basically making you work harder with your breathing at a time when you're supposed to be resting. So imagine if I just made you like do your taxes all night instead of sleeping, you'd be pretty miserable the next day. That's basically what snoring does to you, right? Okay, so let's do this. Let's pull this thing up. All right, I'm gonna turn on some lights, turn on a little bit of air. Okay, so. So the easiest way, find your diaphragm. This is something that you can take with you. You can do this with your friends and your spouse or your kids or whoever. Literally anybody who's curious, motivated, or suffering can benefit. So first thing that I want you to do is find your sternum with your 2 fingers. Good. Once you got that bony part in the middle of your chest, travel down until it disappears. And you get to the squishier part. This is probably where you got the wind knocked out of you when you were a kid. You got a soccer ball like right in the gut. So with your fingers right there, they don't need to be super hard. What you're going to do is you're going to take tiny little micro sniffs the way that dogs do. Dogs sniff like this. They go outside and they go. If you feel your chest moving, try to consciously sort of back off a little bit. Less, really, yeah, you got it. Just takes a little less trying. And that's the problem is the good triers. I'm a good trier. If you really want to try, right? This requires kind of letting go of that and backing off. Sort of a beautiful metaphor for life. Okay, so if you've got that, now change it to a human sniff. We're going to go with a smooth human sniff that goes from my abdomen and flows up my chest. You want to feel your fingers move as you begin that inhalation. If you want to spread your fingers out like this, you can do that too. This is basically the keystone for breathing right here. When this area moves first and most, you've got a leg up. Everything is going to flow from there, but you kind of got to get this. Nice. Okay. Now, if you take your hands and put them on the sides of your lower ribs, we want thumbs sitting on top of our hands. As somebody once said, this is therapy. This is a lawsuit. So we're going to do this. Put our hands like that. It allows my shoulders to be back. And I got my pinkies right around the lowest part of my ribs. And the rest of my fingers are right in that little keystone spot. So I'm going to take a nice smooth breath in. And I'm going to feel it go into my fingertips. But I'm also going to do it into my hands. There's that lateral expansion. Yeah. Flush against your body. Make sure your fingers and palms are up against your skin or up against the clothing over your skin so you can really feel it go into your palms. When you feel like you've got it, simply stand up. We're going to keep it going, okay? Because standing is a little harder than sitting. Laying is easier than sitting, but if you've got it, try to do it in this gravity-dependent position. Now your diaphragm's having to work a little harder. Yeah. Yep. Got a room full of people who've got it. Nice. So if you feel like you've got it, simply just start shifting your weight back and forth. Now, all we're really talking about right now is inhale. Okay, this is all about your inhale. Your exhales, different conversation. We're going to focus on this first. Good. If you can, just try to march in place. In time, this becomes natural. It may feel totally weird right now. That's fine. So if you can feel it, that's step 1 to nudging the system. Step 2, we're going to go see it. So we can do this a couple different ways. Either you can look at someone else, or you can go and find a mirror. So we've got mirrors here in the end of the room. There's a mirror in each of these rooms, so kind of spread out, find a mirror, find yourself, and try to look at yourself from about a 45-degree angle. So as I'm looking at myself in the mirror, I've got a 45-degree angle. This is going to help me to see a little bit of everything new. Okay. Bring it over to the left. Wait until you see yourself. So first, focus on seeing your atom. That's what we want to pay attention to. And if you're standing and you kind of face towards the window, drop your left hand from the bottom. That's the right hand. So we try to appreciate it. If we were doing this in a patient care situation, you have shirt off, so you get a little bit more. But tonight, when you brush your teeth, watch your body without your clothes on, try to see your breathing. So take about a 45-degree angle, just like I am here. And first focus on seeing the abdomen. You'll see it not only move forward, but you'll also see it moving side. Try to appreciate every little aspect of it. Never do I want you to be thinking push. It's more about pull down with my back and let it expand. Yeah. Make sure that hand's kind of right on those ribs. And if you can see that, now train your focus to your chest wall. So what we want to see in the chest wall is not lifting like this, but instead what's called pump handle expansion of the upper ribs. So as I'm breathing, not only will I see this expand, but then gradually it's going to move into my chest. And then the last thing that's going to move is this, just like a pump handle. It may be subtle, but it's there. And you might even just see it on the exhale. That's all those little subtleties of your. Now, this is one that not everybody will get. Everybody got this. Pay attention to your accessories, shoulders, and your sternocleidomastoid. Okay. Think of this as these are staying quiet, and if you take the biggest functional breath you can, let it flow all the way through your abdomen into your chest and grab it here. The last thing that's going to contract is a little flicker of muscle in your sternocleidomastoid. Like a period at the end of the sentence. Let's take a big full functional breath. And just there it is. See how it's being at the very top, just barely tight a little bit. Got it. Chest. There it is. Yeah. That subtle little tension. You go. See, yeah, right there. That's like the signal that you just took the biggest breath you can. You got everything to expand down here. So watch mine. I think this is big. So watch mine. We're watching the various ability to see. So as I take a deep breath, this is going to take at the very top. That right there, just really subtle. I'm not trying to do that. It's just naturally kicks in. These are all wired. These are breathing. So if I'm saying, biggest breath I can take, that's that last one. So seeing your breathing helps to solidify this. So now you feel it and you can see it. The last thing we're going to do is use it. We're going to move a little bit. So while you're doing that, take another minute or so to kind of keep focusing on what you feel and see. I'm going to prepare the room. We're going to move around. Okay. So please feel free to fire away. Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
You mentioned left nostril regulates right brain, right nostril regulates left side of the brain. And I've taken like some yoga classes where you feel this breathing.
Alternate nostril breathing.
Nostril breathing. Is that what's happening?
The idea, okay, so there's a couple things going on with alternate nostril breathing. Anytime we get into yoga zone, I fully admit I don't come from a yoga background. I don't speak Sanskrit. I have no yoga training. But what I do look at is functionality. So when somebody's doing alternate nostril breathing, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to slow down because you have to breathe in your nose. You only have half that capacity, so you really do slow your breathing down. Two, there is some element of kind of splitting things a little bit, like from breathing the right nostril and then breathing the left nostril. Perhaps I'm kind of leaning into that brain regulation thing, but I haven't seen any studies behind whether or not it actually does increase our ability to regulate our mood or our brain in any way. I think the main thing is simply just getting people to stop doing what they automatically do with their breathing. So, whatever gets somebody to slow down, I'm good with. The problem that I have with alternate nostril breathing is it's really not functional. You just can't type an email or walk down the street or, do anything like this. There's no marathon runners that do this at all. But there's plenty of people that are going, who, if we can find that balance in between, of like, all right, let's just get you to start accessing your nose. What's interesting about your nose, there's a lot of things about it, but the only thing that keeps your nose open and flowing is breathing. Like, you get mucus production 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter what. And the second that you stop using your nose and instead breathe with your mouth, that mucus production doesn't cease, but the only thing that was getting things moving actually does. So in a sense, more nose breathing leads to more nose breathing, and more mouth breathing leads to more mouth breathing, if that makes any sense. You get a little higher seat here. Good question.
Recommend just a touch on that. That's usually done for spiritual purposes. So it's done for the brain, for quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that like a pumping up the brain, the byproducts and regulating the brain?
It-
Is it like
Yeah, I mean, it kind of becomes a little bit of a chicken and egg thing.
balance?
Yeah, like your nasal cycle is hours long. So this side's getting more action for like 3 hours. And then this side is, the fastest a nasal cycle can go is like every 20 minutes. So if I'm just breathing in and out every other breath through each nostril, I think you're going to get the calming effect. I don't really know what it's doing for brain regulation. And I know for sure that slowing down helps, so for any spiritual practice, I'm glad you brought that word up. So the root of the word spirit is spiritus, which is Latin for breathing. So there's literally nothing that doesn't have an element of breathing in it. There's no spiritual practice, whether we're looking at Jainism or Hinduism or Buddhism or Christianity or Hebrew, it all comes down to breathing. And, you kind of can look in those different texts and see like, okay, creation, right? It's God made the world in 6 days and then breathed life into Adam. Like, there's very much this element of, we know it has some component to something we don't understand. And it's kind of wrapped into everything. So every spiritual practice involves breathing. The problem is some people can get turned off by some of the language that we use to talk about that. Like, if you're an 81-year-old guy in Burns and you have a heart attack and you come to the ICU at St. Charles, I'm not going to talk to you about spirituality. I'm not going to talk to you about meditation. I'm not going to talk to you about chakras or any of this other stuff. I'm going to talk to you about breathing, because that's a thing you do. So it's about like demystifying some of the language that's out there to make breathing more approachable, so that it's like anatomy, not pet names, not other languages, just keeping it as clear and relatable as possible. I think that's kind of my approach, because I think everything starts with understanding what you're doing with your breathing. Really good segue. I appreciate that. And I should admit with that, I'm also that person that's like spooked by the term meditation and all this stuff, like, it's the kind of thing that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even like certainly 20 years ago, as soon as you start talking about meditation, you lose me. Anytime we're checking into something that's harder to pin down into science, I get skeptical. I backdoored my way into this sort of realm. Like, now I live in a zone of breathing where it's like tons of meditation and energy and yoga and chakras and all this other stuff. It's just not, there's none of that in the ICU. And so there's none of that in me. It's not that I don't subscribe to its importance, and how it gets translated to other people is really, really helpful. But for me, I'm trying to create something that brings everybody under one tent of clear language, so that somebody who is coming from an energy or medicine or meditation or yoga background can fill in the blanks in their language and update it with terms that are easier to say in a broader setting, if that makes sense. Can I answer your snoring question? Okay. So snoring and sleep and breathing, it's a big, big question, because there's estimations that 80% of Americans have sleep apnea of some sort. You will find different sources that say that snoring and sleep apnea are different. Essentially, Sleep apnea means you're stopping breathing at some point when you're asleep. And snoring means you're creating resistance with your structures that is impeding your breathing. So you're basically momentarily pausing when you're snoring, even if it's just nanoseconds. Sleep apnea, much longer pauses. Think of like these, like think of this as my tongue and this is my airway, okay? If I'm snoring, I'm going. If I'm sleep apnea, I'm. So they're kind of cousins. When that's happening, taking that one period of rest, making it the hardest work we do all day. If you watch somebody's structures when they're snoring, you'll see their breathing system is actually resisted. It's like working really hard. You'll see the chest working hard. You'll see the neck working hard and the shoulders. Everything jumps in. It's not like they're quietly just using their abdomen, which is what happens when you're functionally breathing. So getting somebody's sleep disordered breathing under control has all these different pieces to it. One, positioning. The position we're in can make or break our sleep. Now, this isn't like a sleep on your back and you're dead, but sometimes sleeping on our back can open things up a little bit. Sometimes getting rid of that second pillow can open my airway. Sometimes I need that second pillow to prop my whole system up. So there's all this position that we basically just want the airway open and we want people's chest walls not compressed. When I lay on my side, what happens is my shoulders and everything compress. So it actually can be really hard to breathe on your side. So what I advocate for is kind of a quarter turn. You stuff a pillow back here and you get some pillows between your leg and you sort of open up the body that way. That's really how we position you in the ICU if you had trauma. Like if you hurt yourself, I'm not going to lay you on your back for that long because that's going to mean ulcers on your butt. And you can't really lay on your side all the time because it sort of closes things down. But that quarter turn after surgery or after a chest wall injury, or really, I mean, I'm years away from all that stuff and that's still how I sleep every night because it just feels better on my body, feels better on my shoulder, my hip, kind of spreads out the impact. Number two, got to get the mouth closed. Chances are high that if you're snoring, your mouth is open. It's not always. You can snore with your mouth shut, but it usually means you're kind of compressing some structures, which can probably be alleviated by position. If your mouth is open, we want to get it shut. There's a lot of different ways to do that. There are chin strap devices that close the mouth. There's also a lot of different products that fall under the category of mouth taping, which sounds kind of insane, like taping my mouth shut at night. But yeah, but it's a pretty common practice and it's kind of coming into in vogue. It's sort of in vogue right now. And all it means is putting something over the mouth to make sure that it closes. What we really want is we want our tongue to do this job. Our tongue connects to the roof of our mouth. If you take your finger and put it in your mouth, you'll feel those bumpy ridges on the roof. Those are called palatine rugae. They're basically like suction cups for your tongue. So your tongue moves up here and rests up against the roof of your mouth, which brings your jaw forward, closes it, and allows the palate to grow wide because the tongue kind of pushes it out. The opposite's also true. If my mouth's hanging down and my tongue's not connected, my jaw just grows like this. And it leads to all kinds of problems. So if we can get the mouth closed at any point, that's going to help. People that are wanting to try that, my advice is always make sure that you don't have some structural deviation in your nose, right? That you can pass air through both nostrils. Even a deviated septum is usually not a deterrent. I still have yet to meet anybody who can't move air through both sides of the nose, even with a severely deviated septum. When we do that, we're going to encourage the nose to work a little bit more. So that might be a simple fix that can help. But if you're going to consider mouth taping, what I do is make sure you get the right tape. I advise for paper tape that you'd use on like a wound on your arm, stuff that you get in the hospital to tape your IV down, or a kinesio tape, which is stretchy tape in one direction, but not stretching in the other. It's the stuff that like volleyball players and athletes are wearing like on their body when you watch the Olympics. Yeah, it looks like this. But essentially what you do is you take a little piece of tape. There's lots of different ways to do it. This is the easiest way that I advise. Just take your little piece of tape and I'm going to press my lips together. I'm not going to smush them outward or inward. I'm just going to smush them down. And then I'm going to take this tape and I'm going to spread it across my lips. If I can hang my jaw and my mouth doesn't open up, I'm good to go. I personally like to tape all the way across. Some people like to just do a little strip here. Some people do an X. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. I've played with all kinds of different things when it comes to like trying to get one side of my nose to open up, tape my mouth, taping one side of my nose. And it's a weird road to go down, but it does work for a lot of people. And it's a very simple fix. So what I advise you do is do it about an hour before you go to bed. and just live with it. See how it feels. You might pull it off after an hour of sleep or 10 minutes, who knows? But usually if you've done it 2 or 3 or 4 nights in a row, you're going to sleep all the way through the night and you're going to wake up feeling more rested. Signs that your mouth may be open at night. A, snoring. B, do I have a cup of water next to my bed that I need as like a security blanket? Do I wake up with a dry mouth in the middle of the night? Do I wake up to have to pee a couple of times? Do I wake up just to wake up? Like you have all these things happening in your sleep that you don't realize. But if any of those are familiar signs, then chances are your mouth's open and it's definitely got a cost. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So would the taping it eventually help you to just do that
Yeah.
naturally then?
Yeah, it kind of trains the body. I mean, everybody's anatomy is a little bit different, but people find that when they've trained it for a couple of weeks, that they can take some days off. And when they've trained it for a long time, they can kind of go a week on, 2 weeks off, and just sort of gradually do it. My wife is my favorite case because she's the one I get to look at it and hear all the time. And she was so resistant to this stuff for a long time. And then she started catching herself and noticing and like seeing all the signs. She's like, okay, well, I'm going to try it. And it took her 3 or 4 days. Then she was in. And then she got that feeling of like, okay, I feel different. And now I'm finding myself wanting to do this. And that's really where it all comes together. And now when she doesn't, her mouth's generally closed.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, there are a lot of ways to get someone's mouth to be closed. So if someone's asleep, this is mostly with kids, but it can work with your spouse also. Airway problems start very young. We're born nose breathers. Babies can nose breathe. It's how they can breastfeed and eat or breathe at the same time. They don't go and then come back, right? They can do it for hours and hours and they fall asleep like that. But along the way, things happen and then they develop these patterns that they end up breathing with their mouth. Pacifiers can be one of those things because if the pacifier falls out, the mouth is left hanging open. So that's one thing. And it sort of causes things to grow in a really funny direction. Another thing is they can simply just open their mouth. When their mouth opens, it's really just like, how do I get this to close? A couple of simple ways to do it. You can manually do this. Like if I just take my finger and flick down, flick up, flick down, flick down, like just like that. The mouth just goes, and we react. We've got these little feeding reactions on the side of our mouth. Like if you were, babies, if the nipples rub right here, they go, and they latch on. So you can kind of get their mouth to just go. And then if they swallow, their tongue goes up to the roof of their mouth. Like if you swallow right now, find out where your tongue ends up. Right there, right? And now you're closed. So if we can get that and nudge the system that way, super duper helpful. Another way to do it is simply blowing. So if I come at an angle like this and just go, it's enough to get them to close their mouth. The most kind of intense version is using your fingers like this and your thumb underneath and kind of doing a 3-finger closure where you close the lips and then close the jaw and sort of pull it all together like that. And then you just kind of stay there until you feel like they swallow. And they may sort of root around and move a little bit, but all of that can be affected by position. So if you notice that somebody's like this, all you gotta do is just get their head and bring it back to the middle and their mouth's probably going to close. There's all kinds of stuff happening, but if we're just looking at it, it's really helpful. So for every parent or any person that's interested in what their spouse is doing, have a headlamp with a red light setting so that you can have it on and actually like really see what the heck is going on. My phone is full of videos of my kids at night when they messing with their mouths. And hopefully I haven't scarred them too much, but yeah, that's that kind of thing. There's more in the parenting zone, but I'll sort of play on that. Any other questions?
Have you heard of screen apnea?
Screen apnea.
Those of us that are on computers a lot, you tend to breathe less
Mm.
or stop breathing because of some of the stress of what you're working. So
I have heard of a condition called email apnea. And it's probably derived from something similar.
Yeah.
What email apnea says is that, like, let's say you're working on an email, you might be breathing, but as soon as another task dings in, like you get a text, you hold your breath when you're looking at that text. And maybe you hold it the whole time and you reply and send it, and then you come back and start breathing again. And breath holding is actually something that humans do. We hold our breath subconsciously. There's many reasons. One of them is balance. Like if you're about to fall, you go, oh, and you hold your breath for a second because you stabilize yourself because you're not moving. So you can kind of hold it together, but it's not sustainable because eventually you got to keep breathing. Another time we do is when we're emotionally overloaded, we just stop. And this is exactly what I thought of when you're like, my work presentations, like I'm barely even breathing, like I can't take a big breath. Everything just sort of holds tight. All of it's a reflection of our nervous system. Breathe how we feel how we breathe. So when you're tense, barely breathing, right? You might be hyperventilating, but if you're subtle, you're really just tight as can be. So it's really, well, it's a little bit different. I mean, I have not been necessarily taking deep breaths in. It's not like I've stopped and gone and then keep talking. So a lot of times when I'm talking, I'm getting quick little breaths in my mouth. And like this setting is challenging. Talking for 70, 80 minutes straight, that's not easy to do. But in my day-to-day life, everything comes in through the nose, you know, running, you name it. And if you've noticed, every time there's a pause, I'm breathing with my nose because I'm just sort of catching it. Because really it's more about like, what do we do after we've held our breath? Talking, singing, these are basically breath holding. It takes like a teaspoon of air to create sound. So like I can say a long sentence to keep talking, but it's like, what do I do after that? What do I do after I've held my breath? Do I breathe back in like that and shock my system? Or do I breathe in functionally and tell it everything's okay? So in what you're talking about, like screen apnea, when you notice you've been holding your breath, what do? The best thing you can do for your body at that point is take a deep, slow, functional breath, let it out slowly. Because usually what we do is we hold it, so our CO2 goes up. So we hyperventilate to blow it all off. And then we hold our breath again and it goes up. And then we hyperventilate to go up. And both the holding and the hyperventilating tell our brain that we're not safe. There's a tiger chasing me, something's not good. And that's what drives chronic stress up over time. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. That being said, teaching people how to hold their breath as long as they possibly can in a safe setting is one of the most powerful tools that I carry. It's worked for people that have decades of trauma, decades of waking up in the middle of the night like this. But we teach that person how to hold their breath, static breath holds, like you're training for free diving. And they do that and they learn how to manage this stressful state. And they just raise their carbon dioxide tolerance, which means they're raising not only their stress ceiling, but they're raising their shortness of breath ceiling. They can do more with less. They feel better doing what they're doing. One of the most common things they say is the things that used to bother me don't bother me like they used to. And it gives you this feeling of comfort and discomfort. And if I just came up to you right now and I was like, all right, Cheryl, hand over your nose and mouth, cortisol, norepinephrine, like adrenaline, you're in stress for sure. But weirdly, if you do it to yourself, you get those, but you also get a big hit of dopamine because you did something hard, you did something good, and you're like proud of yourself. And so we get people in that loop of like, oh my God, I'm basically addicted to carbon dioxide all the time. And it helps everything in your life. So it's a pretty healthy addiction. I guess I don't really lead with that. I'm a drug dealer, but I'm basically a drug dealer. I'm just trying to get you hooked on carbon dioxide. Like, yeah, try some. It's really good. So that's all that stuff. Any other questions? Oh my God, I feel like
Besides like coming here and taking your classes, those things, how you recommend how we learn more about this?
Yeah. 3 steps. Number 1, today, and you can put these in today. When you go home, feel your breathing. Just put your hand on your right. You can do it like this and feel that difference, you know, bottom hand first, top hand second. This is a really helpful position. And feeling that starts to make an imprint on my brain. Especially if I got my eyes closed, more than half of our brain has something to do with our eyes. So when I do this, I'm retraining what breathing feels like. And make sure to take those deep, full breaths and then just let it out and really take the time to feel it. Feeling it's good, you can do it in any position. You can do it with your eyes shut or eyes open. Seeing your breathing, step 2. Look in the mirror, watch your body breathe. Ideally without anything on your top half. Like when you're brushing your teeth, this is the perfect time to do it. Right before you brush your teeth, stand at that 45-degree angle and watch. Watch this expand, watch this expanding, and watch this stay calm and start to put a mental picture together for what breathing looks like. Remember, visual creatures. So if I can feel it and I can see it, means I can see it in my mind's eye, which means I can then go use it. And that's step 3. Take one functional activity every day. Doesn't have to be intense. And turn it into a breathing first activity, kind of like we did in here, where we were walking around and dancing and moving and stepping. And, you know, you can do the dishes and just think, I'm going to breathe slowly, deeply, functionally the whole time. And before long, you get comfortable doing that in a variety of positions. Maybe it's standing, maybe it's walking, maybe it's running, maybe it's dancing. There's a lot of dancing that happens in here because we have to get that sort of free form movement of our body, not really thinking so much, but like doing and being. And your breathing's a part of all of that. And we know that if you can breathe deeply while you're dancing, you're going to have a better time. I do a lot of dancing. And if you ever see me on the dance floor and you could hear it, this is what it sounds like. Big, slow breaths, just moving a lot. And it's almost like rubbing your belly and patting your head at the same time, except you're just rubbing your belly really slowly and patting your head really fast. Yeah, good question.
How do we breathe deeply, stay healthy?
Oh.
Unhealthy or hazardous?
Well, filtration through masks is helpful. I mean, that's kind of, if we're really talking about particles in the lungs and it's that bad when the AQI is like over 2, it's bad. Masks change our mechanics. Pandemic was sort of delightful for me at the same time as it was horrific. You know, when I wasn't in the ICU dealing with like just the saddest stuff in the world, I was out in the community. I'd see people with their masks, and it was such a giveaway to see when somebody was breathing with their mouth. It just moves like crazy. And the reason we do that is oftentimes we open our jaw to keep the mask in place. We all have like these horrible PTSD memories of COVID when it was like wearing a mask all the time and how much you sort of got to know what that was like. But you had to keep this pressure on, like the nose bridge pressure. And so we open our jaw to kind of pull that down, and now we're mouth breathing. So we're kind of wrecking ourselves. If you can breathe slowly with a mask on in your nose, you can breathe slowly with a mask off in your nose. It really does come down to the same mechanics. So AQI is really high, put on a mask, take a walk, but you can also stay inside for a while. You know, there's a lot of exercise. Do you? Okay, what do you do for work? Oh yeah, then I'd be masking it up for sure. On the big days, definitely. And just kind of making sure that you're taking breaks and monitoring, like, okay, what am I pushing myself? Like, am I hyperventilating right now? Because I preach I don't even like that word, but I offer a breathing first approach to life where you're out landscaping and you're pushing your system as hard as your breathing will let you, not as hard as your body will let you, because your body can get you to the point that you're like, but if you train everything, whether it's running or landscaping or walking or biking or anything, to be breathing first, meaning breathe slowly, deeply, functionally, and let all the activity level be dictated by that. Eventually, they both start to rise and you end up doing more with your functional breathing than you could with your dysfunctional breathing, running faster, running farther, swimming better, all that good stuff. Yeah, good questions. This is a really good group. If nobody has any more questions, I'm going to take my moment to just say thank you. You know, there's a very long time where I was kind of shouting into the void about all this stuff, being like, breathing is the most important thing in the world. And nobody wanted to hear it because it's hard to talk about breathing. It's really personal. It's hidden under my clothes. It's anatomically hidden from my view. And it's like we said, it's a projection of your nervous system. It's all the stuff you ever went through in your life just on display. So nobody really wants to talk about it. Very personal. But that's starting to change. People are starting to want to learn about this thing because they realize, you know, I think there's something connected with this thing. Maybe this is important that I understand it. And for me, like that's my purpose in life, is to literally bring this forth in a clear and concise way. Although I've been talking for 90 minutes, so maybe it's not that concise. But either way, I'm very grateful. And I'm always grateful for the same 4 things. Every time. I'm grateful for who I am. Number 1. I'm grateful for where I am. I'm grateful for what I'm doing, and I'm grateful for who I'm with. And that's each of you spending your time here. And I really appreciate it. So it's been a privilege.
Thank you, Andy. This recording will be available on the website and we'll have information, link to Academy West so you can check out the classes and the individual training options and all that good stuff, and encourage everyone to take advantage of it.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks.